I can't, that we haven't worked out, it's not going to work anyway.
You're live.
Oh, I don't believe it.
This is awkward. For those... That's it.
For fuck's sake.
All right, we'll give it a minute or two and see who comes on. We are 51 minutes late. 51 minutes we've been trapped inside the Matrix. We checked everything. Software, the hard drives, the processor, speed of the RAM. I wonder, are we okay with sound? Oh, so we have no one looking at us. Gone. Hey, where'd you go to? I suppose, we can tell ourselves this anyway. One of the things we're doing is just having a conversation.
It's sort of unofficial, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder.
That was our own fault for using the word matrix. No, we really did get trapped in the matrix.
We did, and eventually we got our way out of it, I think. Yeah, we'll give it a couple of minutes. And the only reason we're giving it a couple of minutes is because we are 52 minutes and 33 seconds late. We just literally come on. Not we come on, the computer eventually come on. All right. Trish Nolan, howdy. That'd be Trish Riley at Lawn. Wonderful activist, doing wonderful work. And can you tell us how the sound is? Oh, we're building up popularity now. We're flying now. We got 4 people. Whew. Are you nervous now? Yeah, this is kind of we're just about to call it a day, and sound is okay. Good, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think we can.
So as you say, nothing to do with the storm. Nothing to do with the storm.
Yeah, it's all to do with the Matrix. Yeah, this conversation is going to be just...
I'm trying to share it.
Okay, you can keep sharing. I just keep talking to the 6 people in case we lose any of them. Yeah, we know how you get when you see people leaving.
Yeah, that was a bit awkward now, in fairness. I have no idea why it didn't connect. It's very strange, isn't it?
John Connors. That's John Connors, the actor. Great ongoing chats, lads. Well, I appreciate that, my friend. This one's going to be, it's going to be quite simple. It's all about the Matrix.
Yeah.
All right, I think we get started.
Give me 1 second now. Yeah. Oh, no, go on. Yeah, just say.
But you're introducing anyway. Because this is a Christmas special too. We forgot because we're the best part of what? An hour we're trying to figure out what happened to the computer. Make it worse, Dylan has a cat. There's a cat in the Matrix, and the character sees the cat making a glitch or sees 2 of the same cat. So Dylan's cat was behind the computer. So for an hour and a half, Dylan was convinced the cat had something to do with it.
It's our own fault for mentioning the word matrix, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Or we're trapped in the Matrix.
So, from what I understand today, today we're going to explain what we've actually been talking about for the last ages. Is that true?
I wish you look at that.
Because we haven't, maybe it hasn't been all that, well, it's been clear enough, but not that clear. So there's sort of philosophy behind it, isn't there? You told me something very interesting at one stage, and it is to do with the Matrix, because we're going to talk about films today.
We also got to do a review as well, didn't we?
Yes.
This is an interesting one if you're still watching, John, because we got asked to do a review on that movie, Float Like a Butterfly. And I know straight off the bat anyway, I was critical of it. But I don't let myself in hot water too because I made a couple of glitches. But we give that a review.
You haven't seen it yet, though, have you?
No, but we'll give a review. After I've seen it, I give a review.
I think it's...
sorry. But on the premises of how it was laid out from the beginning, it kind of almost projected travelers in the stereotypical, on wastelands and
of course.
Daughters having hard times and smoking fags. I mean, that was just real settled lens looking at us.
Oh, yeah.
That part was missing.
Yeah.
I was meant to play the father, but I backed out. So that was John Connors, the actor, who was, I suppose it had to be semi-involved when he backed out. But yeah, I don't know what John's reasons were, but that would have been my instinct. And I think a lot of travellers at that stage were seeing a lot of the old Glen Rowe that never changed, how travellers were predicted in RT, bunched together in trailers, living in pigsty environments, uneducated, stupid, all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, of course, yeah.
I remember he was Bruce Lee, wasn't it? Was it Bruce Lee in watching the movie where the Americans were mocking Chinese people, and Bruce Lee got up and walked out of the movie?
Oh yeah,
for obvious reasons. It's a bit like how travellers see ourselves.
Yes,
we feel that too.
Yeah, well, I think it's on over Christmas, so we're going to give it a go and see what.
And on Christmas Day is the other movie, Into the West, which was a brilliant film. It had, because believe it or not, it gave a lot more character and culture to travellers. How important horses were to the young lads. About the situation about being poverty, looking through TV through someone else's outside through somebody else's window. That side give it a bit more cultural aspect, I suppose. That's it. We're movie critics now.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, like we're saying, yeah, movie critics, exactly, without even seeing the movies.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true too.
No, but we will review that. We're saying, yeah. That's important, all that kind of portrayals, isn't it? And that comes. I was going to say that comes back to this. What was today's one about? Matrix, Jedi, all that kind of thing. What was I saying? You told me about the. I suppose what I'd like to ask you about is about how is the Matrix related? If you know what I mean, like that story. First of all, the Matrix film itself, right? Maybe if is about computer, reality being created by a computer code type of thing, isn't it? So. What we want to sort of talk about here is a slightly strange idea, but it's about how a lot of underlying a lot of what we've talked about here is actually a very similar idea, in the sense that culture, if you liken culture to a program, if you know what I mean. That program can be changed, it can be hacked, it could be this way or that way. When you're inside the program, it seems to make sense, and that seems to be the only way things can be, you think. Or when you're outside it, or when the program is alien to you, if you know what I mean, then it's not so easy, is it?
I suppose with the Matrix, right, before we start going to talking about it, it's a metaphor more than anything else. It's something to say, and people might watch the Matrix. It could be another movie. It could be Lord of the Rings. It could be where the orgs are coming to destroy the environment and destroy things, whatever it might be. It could be films Star Wars, same thing, the Empire and the good and evil and all this kind of stuff. Colonialism. They talk openly in Star Trek about colonial planets, stuff like that, Death Star. So there's all different metaphors we can use. And other people talk about mentalities, and some people think human species are a virus.
Yeah, well, you've talked a lot about mentalities, though, and for a lot of people that might not be that clear what you mean exactly. You know what I mean? When you're talking about like this, in Ireland, we when we're talking about mentalities, we're saying, well, there's this, we're saying settled one or this one, or what from your point of view, you know what I mean? Or traveller, not that everyone is the same within those communities, obviously, but like, you know what I'm getting at, a general idea. And I think a lot of people.
I see education, particularly the English education and the one that's in Ireland for a very long time, I see that very similar to programming. The same way you would program a computer to do something. I don't see very much a distinction between that and settled education. The film The Matrix, right? Basically, The Matrix was to wake people up that they're in a kind of a virtual reality, that the reality that they were living in wasn't really, really real. But you wouldn't know that if you were in there, and especially if you were brought up and reared inside it and you're programmed to think this is reality. That's your understanding reality. So it works on the sensories of the humans of touch, feeling, sight. There's a couple of more in there somewhere. But basically, I compare that the same way you would take a child and put them into a school and put them into the classroom, and you sit them down, you tell them what to do, and the teacher orders them. Then they go to the next classroom and they get critiqued, and then they finish school and they think they have choices to make. But them choices usually lead them into other organizations and other programs. It's like you might have various different programs, like the guard. So you can see a guard a mile away, especially if you're a criminal. But the point is that you can see these distinctions in these characters, these people, how they were programmed, how they were taught, how they practice it out. Same with the army, military, all that kind of stuff. So they're all different kinds of programs. If you want to break it into the kind of a human aspect, you could say that the coding behind the Matrix is the same as the English language when it first came here.
So,
I won't
so,
try, I don't
so,
confuse
so,
people.
if I was to say to you, but when did you first realize, when you first seen that film, you realized that straight away, or did you?
Well, see, I was growing up very young, and I think this is what a lot of travelers, we have a whatchamacallit, an intelligent intuition. In other words, sense it. Our brains are in a hyperactive mode constantly. So we're constantly reading situations, understanding situations long before we even get near them. And that's how we operate. I was in Dublin. I was parked in a field. We're living there. Well, staying there for a while anyway. An illegal camping, what settled people call illegal encampment. We just called it land. But we're there anyway.
Oh, it's definitely illegal.
The Liffey Valley was being built at the time in Dublin. And he had an 8-screen multi-complex cinema, just finished and a whole lot. So I'd seen the advertisement. I was a billboard or somewhere about the Matrix, about this string of numbers. So basically, we're in the camp. So I convinced some of the cousins and the in-laws to go over and watch this film. It was a really good film. Now, I think they already thought I had a sense of good movies because I maybe could have watched a couple of westerns with them, or I knew a few films they'd known. So we went over to Liffey Valley. We didn't start watching The Matrix. Some of them, after a few minutes, were kind of they were trying to figure out what the hell was going on because there were people dodging bullets and flying through the air and everything. Some of them got up and walked out, and the rest of them tried to scandalize me for years afterwards. The innocent movie that I had brought them in to watch. But at that, we'd grown up. I was about 5 years of age, went to school. And you recognize the school, you recognize the difference between settled people, and you can recognize the difference between your own culture and where you come from. At a very young age, I could sense that part out. So again, comparing that to the Matrix, it's almost like one system where the settled mentality operates. And this is an awful thing. It's a shot. The settled mentality, in a way, is like a program. In the 1600s, when the English came here and they colonized here, it was by law that you learn everything about the English mentality. In other words, you have to learn about the English program. So eventually, they're wiping out the old.
Yeah, okay, that's jumping back into the 1600s.
You better watch me because I'm just all over the shop. So
that's fine.
Hey, you're the host.
No, that's fine. But I'm saying when you watched that, when you seen that program, as you told me, when you seen that program, when you saw the Matrix itself, that resonate in some way with your experience immediately as a traveler living in this society, if you know what I mean. Now,
well, I think sometimes
as in you're always that the programs don't quite match, if you know what I'm getting at. Like that pressure, that vigilance. What do they call it? Hypervigilance is what they call it when you're always on the lookout, if you know what I mean, or you have to be because you're operating within the reality of the system around you, if you know what I mean, they're not quite matching. It'd be like, where I was saying to you, like
well, say the travel program
Windows.
would have been, right? It was just take two programs, right? Just take the Irish program, the old Irish program, and the English one.
Yeah.
They're two programs, right? The Irish one was completely different to the English one.
Yes.
You'd know this anyway. You've often talked about it, about the laws, the land.
Yeah, so if we go back to the 16th century, like you're saying, if you go back to that time, what we've talked about already in some of these is that obviously there was it's just a matter of fact. There was several thousand years where a culture develops on this island. It has a certain way of pattern of doing things, certain understanding, old ancient.
Well, it was organic. It was natural.
So reality is created through all of these aspects of but under the colonial thing as we're talking about, which in Ireland happened very violently, and in other parts of the world, which is a key issue, if you know what I mean, to this. Basically, if we call that a program, it's running one way for thousands of years. The next thing, people it wasn't just crushed through violence, though. Me and you have looked into the fact that it's actually a bit more like a hack, isn't it? It was actually studied and they decided how they were going to hack this to change this.
Well, it's like everything else.
Like Spencer's hacking enterprise, wasn't it? What we're going to do is we're going to here's the weak points in this system. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this, and that's going to change these people. Yeah. Because that was actually consciously tried, wasn't it?
This is a real thing that happened that's been written and then during the 1600s, where they specifically set down in the exact same way they did with the 1963 report into the Commission of Irish Travellers, how they would civilize us and how they would assimilate us. Exact same mentality, same coding. So the idea was back then that would take the traveller women, and if they put the traveller women into education systems, they then would rear their children in an educated manner. therefore they would become normal.
Is this in the 60s or in?
This is in the 60s.
Yeah, okay.
Going back to the 1600s, it was the exact same thing. Exact same thing. They said, look, let's beat the Irish out of these people. Let's put them into our programs.
Well, some of them, yeah, they would have, yeah. You're right. You're totally right.
Well, starting with the plantation of Ulster, they created free education the whole way down. Royal colleges were set up with free education. Not like now. They were giving free education to everyone. And the idea was it was an investment.
Just to say, most people wouldn't have been educated. They would give it to the gentlemen, as they called them in those days. You know, most people weren't worth educating.
Yeah, but if you think about it, it was a small code. It was a small company starting off. There was a hostile environment. They couldn't trust everybody with this education. So they did give the education to protect their people. In the same way, you've got public schools, you've got higher up schools, then you've got just elitist type schools.
Yes.
If you think that is that language, that mentality is a form of coding, well, they're getting the best coding possibly that's more aligned with a system. Where you don't get that, you get far less code, where you're left to struggle in what you call reality and the world around you.
Well, for Irish people, after that time, after the 1600s, the shape of the system, even the physical world, but everything around them starts to change, because part of that hack that we talk about is physical too, isn't it? It's like it's planned to stop the movement of people and things like this. You know, so there's a structure to it, isn't it? Yeah. It's planned in the 1570s, for example, that hedgerows should be planted along all the road lines and things like this to prevent movement.
So all these laneways, country laneways, you would see with all the hedgerows, each side of them, they were specifically designed to clamp down on the movement of
cattle and horses. People.
Yeah, and people, but more so people, because you think, as you know, back then, the landscape was different for cattle. In other words, people were seeing the world differently. We wouldn't need the defences and the walls.
No.
So the way to narrow them down was to create a new program, a new structure.
Yeah, so to create a new program, you want things to move a different way. To do that, you want to take control of it, if you know what I mean. So they start changing the physical environment. And as you said, they also start changing the mental environment, which is how people see reality. And to do that, they move you into
It's like this thing, and I know this sounds a bit silly in one way, but if you think about this, right, if you would take a tree, right, and you would say which is reality or which was more real. So is the tree that grows into the field more reality than a coffee table that's made out of wood, or a river that's carved out by nature, or a building or a city or a town that's constructed by mentality, human beings? And again, this is where the crossover comes, where I like to find a lot of indigenous people who come from that form of reality, that form of programming, which is more real. So when they meet the construct of other human beings, buildings, towns, roads, so on and so forth, there's a clash. We've got a couple of questions, have we? Any abuse yet?
No.
Cognitive
Patrick Pearce distinguished that as difference between the education of the master and the education of the slave. Yeah.
Here's the other thing about the education thing, and a lot of people got this confused for a very long time, I think anyway. I'm what I call totally uneducated in terms of the formal sense. I've no certifications, none of that kind of stuff. And I left school at about 13, and even leaving at 13, I still didn't even have that level of education. But there's a difference between intelligence and education. I remember last week I was talking about Michael Bumby McDonough. God love him and bless him and save him and keep him well. That chieftain used to say back in the day that if you talk long enough to fool, you become a fool. In other words, you can be, and that means the foolish and fool. You can have smart people, but doing very unintelligent things, and that's just a given. So I think there's that clash between intelligence.
Well, maybe you remind me there of mate. I'm going to talk. I can talk about that. The after effect of the. Remember, I was telling you that that across the board that can like those things happen. Okay, so for travelers, it's very immediate because it's literally that conflict, as you said to me once, the conflict between the two mentalities, or the conflict between the two between the machine that was created under the colonial the state itself, and that mentality never went away. But actually, even within this, because people forget over time what was done. You know what I mean? Obviously, they can't quite remember what was happening in the 1600s, or that this was all planned. It was planned to change your mentality, so you would no longer understand your own world, if you know what I mean. To disconnect Irish people in general from the past that had gone beforehand. So how do you snip those threads? Well, it was very cleverly done. They just, as you say, it's through language, things like that. There's certain plays about this sort of thing as well. But it's as simple as changing the names of things and changing the things that are in reality. Once you change physically the territories that people lived in, change the name of them, and then no longer do We have lots of lists of chiefs or lists of kings or lists of peoples who lived in various areas, but they go back maybe nearly 2,000 years. But all of a sudden, to take it in, like I described to you in Sligo, you'd have Carbra, you'd have Carbra Drumcliff, you'd have Tír Éilill.
These were the
McDonoughs
clans, tools, and
so you'd have Connors here, McDonoughs there, O'Dowds over there, and various others. But once they changed that to County Sligo, there is no old poems connected anything to County Sligo. Nothing, none of those clans have anything to do with County Sligo. That's a different thing. So that immediately disconnects, snips the connection. And then after that, as the mentality kind of that you're describing, the mentality of the reprogram, a different program, running a different program, you literally can't even now interpret what Irish society was like. And I've seen that in archaeology. Do you remember that discussion? I'll anonymize this somehow, but I will say that I've seen it myself where...
what do you mean anonymize? What's that been?
Anonymize it. I'm not going to mention names.
All right.
Thought
you were going to confirm something I was saying.
No. But what I'm saying,
I dare confirm what he said.
No, but what I'm saying is that the top in archaeology, for example, you end up in very strange scenarios now where we would be using maps to understand old Irish.
Just briefly on that, the importance, I think, not just Dylan, he's been invaluable, but also the occupation, his profession as an archaeologist, how important I feel that is to a lot of things in Ireland. That is one of the most investigative parts of history. You're the guys who goes out, digs, you're the guys who confirm what you found, what you didn't find. And you're also one of the most suppressed groups in Irish society. Not as in people, but as an organisation.
Well, maybe not all of them, but yeah.
I just wanted to let people understand that how important archaeology really is.
Oh yeah, well thanks, yeah. But and it can be that's a long story in itself. But anyway, to say that if you've got the wrong program in your head basically, and you're trying to interpret a culture or a past which was running a different program, then it actually is very, very difficult. And so we have that problem in archaeology now, where they're trying to interpret Gaelic Ireland back before the 17th century, but using the program that came from the colonial system, and therefore it causes all kinds of problems. I mean, I was saying to you about this case where there's an archaeologist, a fairly eminent archaeologist, arguing with an entire village, an entire area at one stage about whether a castle existed or didn't exist. Now, for them, they'd known the castle was there since time.
And this guy that came down, where did he come from?
Immemorial. Well, he came from the Pale. Came from Dublin, yeah. But
the point would be the mentality different.
Yes, yeah, and that's to do with it. It's not slagging off that.
Yeah, it's not as a person, it could be the nicest person in the world.
So he sent beyond the Pale into this area, and the people there had always known there was a castle there. But the problem is the castle didn't fit the
his worldview.
The worldview, the Anglo-Irish worldview, or the English worldview, or the continental version of a culture of what a castle is. This didn't fit that. Therefore, this isn't a castle. So the people there are saying, well, this is a castle. We've always known it's a castle. It's known as the castle, the king's castle.
Yeah, it's called that literally.
Yes, and has been for ever since we.
But his worldview was that castles were big, glorious, fine buildings, and so on.
Yeah, so it's an English idea of a castle. Yeah, which it's like you're looking at it going.
Or the Irish version could be as big as your house.
Yeah,
it was your house sometimes.
The function is completely different because the program is different, and therefore what a castle has to perform in Irish society is different. In this sense, it's different. This was a king's castle indeed, but I think it was more like a hotel than or like it was running. It had a different function. It wasn't to overawe the populace.
I suspect
by
on
sheer
that.
size. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was to provide hospitality to as many people as possible, and so it had a big section for a brewery and a big section for this and what have you. But it wasn't the same as the English Norman castles, which were plonked on the landscape in order to intimidate everybody, including their own people. And we would learn about those castles, fine. But the problem here is applying the same concept to a different society, and this is the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
You coming into this idea of like this is when you're within the matrix, basically, and this is where it comes to those pills, isn't it? Those Smarties or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't buy them.
Where are they?
I was going to buy them, then forgot
Yeah.
about it.
Okay.
I'll get them next week. I'll bring them tomorrow to you.
He was supposed to, you were supposed to offer me a green or a red.
I was going to offer
pill.
them a green red Smartie.
And
No, but
the
you're
joke there is I'm colorblind.
Oh, well, there you are.
Yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right. And that guy who's come down here had a different worldview. He's seen the world differently. He was taught to see the world the way that he perceived as normal. So therefore, he's going to have a conflict with how other people see the world. Same building. Now, if you take travelers, right? If you take travelers and put us right at this present moment in this settled society, and I was just saying we would have a completely different physical world. But once our world was stripped away from us and destroyed in living memory, not something that happened hundreds of years ago, but literally in living memory, where our physical world was destroyed, we're now in a settled environment. But our psychological differences are well to be world apart in many ways. I also feel that younger travelers grown up are losing part of their history because it's been hidden and it's been destroyed. And most travelers now are not getting to an old age. So they don't even have much history. Most travelers are dying in the 40s, 50s. Most don't get past 65. So that's a lot of history gone. So young travelers are growing up now in a settled environment, and like a lot of Irish people, are confused. I'd imagine part of them feels deep down somewhere they're out of sync with the world, that they don't literally fit in. And no matter how hard they try to fit in, they don't, because this is not their making, I suppose, in some ways.
No, I think when you were describing that to me, I like that the Matrix, that the film itself would have appealed to you, I suppose, as a traveler, even as you were saying, because you're living constantly with that reality of being within a system.
It didn't do me any good either, I'll tell you why, in one ways. It's not that I was overly inspired by it. And I suppose in many ways I was, I think about it, being honest about it, I was. I mean, I did, it wasn't in case I was like, ooh, wow, or getting by the confirmation. I was like, I get that.
That's normal.
But I would have thought everybody,
I
thought everybody who would be watching this would be thinking the exact same thing, because it could be pretty more obvious if you tried. Yeah. And what I was doing was displaying this big complex matrix, this computerized world. But if you compare that system, that matrix, to society or any government or so on and so forth, you would find the crossovers in how they were thinking were much the same. But where it didn't do me much good was that it did help me connect, because then I got onto the NGOs, the travel organizations, and God loved them and God blessed them. Even back then, they were programming in themselves to accept this is the only show in town. They have to go by this criteria. This is what the state says. We can't go above and beyond. So they're already buying into that. So they were getting travelers to do the exact same thing. They were saying, look, this is the only show in town. You have to go do a community development course. You have to get this kind of education. If you get this kind of education, you do a whole lot better. You know, a whole lot more. That wasn't working. What was happening instead was our health statistics were declining. Not our physical world. Our physical world was improving somewhat. We had better living conditions today than we did 50, 60 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But what was happening was our psychological world was being crushed, because the people who were trying to educate us weren't even, they were educated, but it wasn't their organic education. They themselves were part of a program, an English program that was installed into an Irish system. So, of course, everything they taught and all the philosophy and all their ideas were based on this program. That's why we have a big clash at the moment psychologically. I believe that is a huge contribution to the suicides, because I'm a person that suffered with depression. When I went first with the NGOs, I was trying to explain to them. That time I didn't have as good as vocabulary, probably didn't have a better understanding, because I was still trying to figure out things in my life. What the hell's going on here? When I thought something was so obvious, you would say, look, this is pure obvious. So you explain to them. It's not that they would disagree with you. But the more I found, I was getting more and more pushed out. So now I lost the whole platform to the NGOs. So I couldn't even get in contact and fight the system, because I wanted to fight the system full on first.
So you firstly, you thought the Matrix was just common sense.
Yeah, I just thought it was a kind of a formality in one way.
It's obvious.
Obviously not the physical element of it. Don't watch the film, people jumping around dodging bullets. We all know that in the gross exaggeration. But
okay, so
the story of it, how people were programmed,
but then the other part where we get onto the NGOs that you've described to me, which is where, in order to address problems, the problems we're talking about, which we talk about coming from history and that, could we predict that NGOs mightn't, when they engage, if they're created by the state system, then they're created by the same program, okay? So therefore, they're running the same thing.
If you were to guess,
So they're going to run. So we could almost predict they're going to run into the same problem, aren't they?
Yeah,
because
it's a bit like the legal world,
Yeah.
where people say they get caught up for years in legal battles because the battle of words come out, and people are using better words and all this kind of stuff. It's the same with NGOs when they give them a contract or a script and say, look, this is what you have to do. This is the criteria. Now, one of the criteria the state has on Irish travellers around the Traveller Pride Awards, which I not tried to overly push myself forward, but that was an idea that I come up with at the ITM director of boards and all that were there. But what happened was that the state were telling people that if the travellers didn't turn up, the Traveller Pride Award would still go ahead. So you're thinking, how is that even possible? How do you have a Traveller Pride Awards where the event will still go ahead if there are no travellers? But this is in writing. This is only a couple of years ago. So why would we be saying those things? Such control. Then they were saying that settled people had to be involved, plus they had to be invited. So it wasn't enough we were just going to invite the settled people, but now they also had to give us awards. So the point I'm making is that they were feeding into this system, and the people who were teaching them, all the wonderful community development workers, and this is not a critical of your humanity or your characters or anything like this. This is about the psyche that you've been applying. That is a program that was orchestrated, designed carefully by people 500 years ago in a room, who decided where people will go in society, who will be there, who will be up here, and who will extend and all that kind of stuff. That's my personal opinion. So when I was in the Matrix, I was looking at constant programs, how people could be easily programmed. Everybody has a purpose. If you're a traveller, if it's a traveller or homeless, which I was, or you're a traveller on drugs, which I was, I had a month or two of issues trying to figure this shit out for the last 20 years. So what I'm trying to say is that you can be easily programmed, easily fooled, easily tricked.
So how would you solve that then?
I have absolutely no idea, mate. It's not me to say how we'll solve it. My personal opinion as a traveller is that we create a traveller assembly, that we create that connect, and I suppose to start understanding different mentalities.
We would say that part of the reason, as I was saying, to explain why we're talking about what we're talking about in this series of videos, was that when you understand, well, firstly, we're going to go further into Gaelic Ireland in general, if you know what I mean, as we go on. I think it's very important, isn't it, to understand that, like most people, that in 60, like you said, in 1963 in particular, they consciously wrote at the very beginning of their report on travellers that they were not going to address history or ask any historians anything. Yeah, which is a very strange situation when you think about it, for a country that had just emerged into some kind of independence-ish after centuries of colonization. And therefore, they were saying that any problems we have in this country, we're just not going to bother. We're not going to involve history, which is probably some kind of trauma reaction, even in itself, if you know what I mean. But anyway, they weren't interested in that because they were worried, probably for various reasons. I think they had every conscious reason for doing that.
Well, I'll tell you two links to that. One is the effects of that was they left the people disorientated, traumatized, and then stripped them of valuable information that could have saved many lives. Yeah. They didn't do that. Instead, they went down the route of forced assimilation. In other words, taking children from travellers, put them into schools, right across into institutions, back into the system. Yeah. The other thing about the 1963 report is the mentality had never changed from hundreds of years prior to that. That's what the point I'm kind of making to people is that mentality has never changed. That program, no matter how many times you try to rewrite it, it's coded in a particular way.
Let's put it this way.
Now, go back to 1922. 1922 for your community as well, because it's just much yours. It is mine. What's happening here at the moment, how it's affecting us all. You take the 1963 report. They didn't bring history into it. So they thought the best thing to do was to force assimilation. Go back to 1922, they didn't bring history into it. Actually, the people who were bringing history back into it were all shot. So if you think about it, they did the exact same thing to your community in 1922. They say, let's not go into the history. Let's not go back to Celtic revivals. Let's keep an Anglo-Irish English type program. I'm sorry to lay that on you like that, buddy, but that's what happened.
I'm just trying to work out who my community is. But anyway, I know what you mean. It's interesting that
I did give you a samurai sword last week, a wooden one. I ordained them type Knight Traveller clan member. So when I say your community, I mean the mentality.
I know, I get you. It's interesting. Oh yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
not yours, like per se.
Oh yeah, keep digging.
Well,
it's interesting that they left history out of it, isn't it? Because it's fascinating, because it's like they left the one thing out that you would think would be obvious. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're going to be dealing with all this fallout from this, You know what I mean? What is the situation now that we're independent, and we have people living on the side of the road? I wonder why they're living on the side of the road. Do you know what I mean? We have people that are marginalised from the state for various reasons. I wonder maybe we should find out why that is. Yeah.
Well, look at the damage.
But of course they decided that they didn't want to find out.
Yeah.
Or that they did know and didn't, whatever. Right. So like we're talking about, that's the beginning of really like systematic under the Irish state, a systematic thing. You know what I mean? Of like, we're going to correct this problem by making it go away. By eliminating.
The odd thing is that when we talk about the whole Travers situation, the historical thing, and we put it in a kind of an abstract context, and we say, look, this is what happened in the Travers, this is what's around them, discrimination, racism, the breaking down of the culture. But if you widen that out, that's exactly what happened in Ireland.
Yes.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah,
We're just the last of that mentality.
Yeah.
It isn't because settled people are not Irish or less Irish. It's because our mentality, the programming, has shifted so much that people don't know who they are anymore.
No, because they wouldn't address the history with Travers, but they also wouldn't address it for Irish people in general.
That's correct.
You know what I mean?
And if they did, they disorientated in a way that, Jesus, you couldn't read it. Some was quite sad, really.
Yeah, well, I think basically you got a kind of a quick thing about the famine and a bit about Gaelic, about, there once was a magical time.
Yeah, but they go from the magical time into horrible times.
Then it's all horrible.
Yeah, like there, keep away from there. Ooh, bad feeling.
Yeah, but no actual explanation of what was happening and why how it's connected to now. Yeah. So I mean, like the point as well is I'm saying, like some of the reason that we were talking about this stuff is a positive reason, isn't it?
Because, of course it is.
Because at the end of the day,
Christmas special.
Yeah.
Petrifying people.
At the end of the day, if we understand the machine, if we understand who built the machine and why they built it that way, what it was designed to do, which was, generally speaking, it was creating a modern, the modern state. Okay. That's fine. But in Ireland's case, we weren't creating that state. Someone else was, essentially. And therefore, we have that problem where it was resisted, if you know what I mean. And it was only ever partial and successful. The state was only ever partially successful. And it's important for us to realise that it wasn't
Sinn Féin became the compromise, almost like the NGOs.
Yeah.
It's almost, because you've ever noticed that Sinn Féin never gets into power. You would think for an organic type, deep-rooted history of the country, you would think to be the kind of people leading the country. So that might bring us into another part of the program where we're looking at internalized oppression, where people do mimic the program, who like being in the program, and benefit from the program.
Well, we're very new dealing with that stuff. I mean, people don't realise that, and that's. Like,
I'm not a Sinn Féin supporter as well. I'm just saying,
1923, for example, is the first time that Dublin is really. It's the first time that Dublin has to try to be a capital of this country on its own.
On its own.
Yeah. So it's a new thing for Dublin. You know what I mean? It's a new thing for that system, which up to that point had always been ruled from London or it was just a small.
Yeah, I know there is that. I'd love to say I agree with you in that, but if you think about it, prior to that, you had Trinity College, you had Maynooth College. There were people already being prepped to take care of that system after the English left, even if they didn't know it or not.
Oh yeah.
Because they were part of the administration.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but why would it change? That's what I'm saying to you. Why would it change?
Yeah.
It had never independently ruled this country.
No.
Ever.
So you could.
Yeah. So therefore, why would it change after 1922? If you think about it, unless someone consciously was aware of that. If you know what I mean. If you said, right, what we'd like to do now in the new state, which was part of the revolution, was what we'd like to do now is address issues to do with the conquest, and that involves the marginalization of people like travellers, and there's others, Irish speaking.
Of course,
we can bring in all the other aspects to do with the Gaelic world and the Irish speaking, and the fact that we're cut off from our history.
So a lot of people think as well, when I'm talking about this, it's solely I'm batting for travellers only. I'm very conscious aware that if anything I'm saying, and hopefully even later in life it will make more sense, that it's not connected just with travellers. This is the beginning and the end of this program in one way. It's where we first resisted it, and it's now we're pretty much breaking point.
The history belongs to everybody on the island. Right?
Yeah,
but the fact is we're the same. The
mentality doesn't.
No, but the same thing that's happened to the same thing of the price we pay for suppressing the history in terms of travellers and other things is the price that it's disconnected from everybody. I mean, we talked earlier, and to get back to movies, we were talking earlier about. Why is it that there is not movie set? I mean, Ireland has this vast history going back, even the written history going back 1600 years. Okay, so why wouldn't movies be made about that all the time? Yeah, where are they all? And why is the oldest movie? I think there is one set in the 12th century or something that was done recently, but I haven't seen it. But I think the current record for any sort of major movie at the moment is about 18. Is the famine one?
Well, again, like people.
But Gaelic Ireland itself. Now, this is a key thing, isn't it? Because this is the Matrix again. If you set out to make one and set it in Gaelic Ireland, how would you do it? If you know what I mean. Well, not you.
Yeah, I was thinking
no,
we have the opportunity.
Yeah, not you, because
we will do it.
Yeah, exactly. But how currently, it's almost not possible. We can make things about Vikings. We can make things about Game of Thrones, fantasy, whatever. They're all set in an English mentality world. Okay, which is fine. It's great. It's great. Well, the Viking one kind of, whatever. I suppose they recreate some things of Vikings, but we know more about Vikings in this country than we, in the popular imagination, than we do about our own history.
That's right.
You know what I mean? In general,
glorious history in many ways.
Well, we have a huge history. It's as big as any. History is history. It's all there.
Well, when we start comparing, remember the samurai soldiers and the clans.
Oh yes. The
reason we mentioned them was because the similarities, very similar programs,
yes.
In terms of how they operate and how they function.
Yes, so we could have endless stories based on that kind of thing, or endless movies and all the rest of it. But obviously, there's a problem, and I would suggest, after long years of looking at it, that there's actually more of a problem in creating those things out of our history than people realize. People think, "Oh, why has that not been done?" But actually, the key to it is actually to do with this discussion we're having about the Matrix and the block, if you know what I mean. Not obviously for travelers, and there's obviously serious emergency issues with travelers right now. But I'm saying right across the board, the culture, it's blocking cultural problem, if you know what I mean. It's blocking access to our past for people right across the island, wherever their background.
I think part of maybe the state, however, is in that element of it that has their advisors telling them this would be a bad idea to talk about such horrors and events and what happened during the past in famine land names. I think you'd be quite surprised how people would react more positively, knowing the truth, not knowing that they're a victim, because we go back far enough on other names ever to crossing over and back. There was villains and heroes on both sides, all the sides, in different times. But the point would be that we get some kind of closure and understanding. Because if you understand your own mentality, if you get the grips of it and say, look, I understand I'm speaking English language, I know it's not mine, it came from somewhere else, and you learn that aspect of it, you'll unblock a multitude of psychological doors, I'd imagine, because not knowing who you are in a form of trauma, deprived of information, knowledge, support, that can play havoc with your system.
Yeah, exactly. So we'd also say that it would mean that it doesn't mean NGOs are out of the question. It's just that we could predict that if you keep replicating parts of the machine set up prior to during the colonial conquest, which was designed. You see, that's what we were laughing in a way about it, but there was a time, as people forget, where what we're referring to as a settled mentality, which is really, the state, the Anglo state mentality that was set up under colonialism. There's a time when that was the minority on the island, and they would have had to have NGOs.
Yeah,
they were protected. You know what I'm getting at? As in, if that was still the case now, that would be, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I would say that it's not necessarily criticize the NGOs. It's not that they're bad people. They're all doing wonderful work and doing wonderful things. And again,
but you see, we need to understand the origin of the mentality behind that. So what I'm trying to get to here is there is a somewhat of a solution, because it has to do with accepting the diversity, if you know what I mean, and that there has to be room in the state for the Gaelic world, if you know what I mean, all its aspects and the rights that go along with language and with other things. They're no better at explaining how it is that Irish language is under pressure. But of course, it's the same matrix, if you know what I mean. The same program is also grinding away at the Irish language.
Yeah.
And it would be, because that's exactly what it was designed to do as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like an automated system in some ways. Yeah.
It's an automated system. Nobody in this is guilty of sitting there consciously pulling the lever and trying to get rid of the Irish language.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
No.
But the problem was we took over a machine that we don't understand, or we didn't understand, or some people refused to, because when they found themselves, benefiting from it to some extent, so that's fine. But it's no longer tenable, is it? Because for travelers, it's literally life or death, and for the rest of the community, it's crippling Ireland in terms of its cultural You know what I mean?
Well, see, if any system creates
Access to its culture.
creates a huge complex system like capitalism or any religion, any complex system, they can say to you, okay, you've got a problem, go down and start here, and you work your way up, and you go up and up and up and up, but you're still operating the same system. You're still functioning in the same system. And before you ever get to the top, if you ever get near the top, what difference would it make? And now the other thing with this mentality, this program, I keep calling them programs, talk about mentality, talk about travel, talk about settle. It's deliberately, in some ways, trying to just create some kind of space, because I'm very much self-sabotaging in some ways. It's because I grew up differently. We all have our life experiences. And like, as I mentioned, I didn't go to school, didn't go to college or anything like that. So I come with a lot of less mannerisms sometimes, I think. Anyway, I piss off a lot of people to get it short. But that's not my intention, because when I see NGOs, I see departments, and I see state agencies, they're all operating the same system. And I'm not saying that's a horrible system. I'm just saying it needs to be changed, or it needs to be alleviated from the stresses that are literally killing people right this moment.
But if we understand where it comes from, we can make some guess as to how we could do that.
We could rewrite it.
What you were talking about it. You were talking about it. Like, it's from that you would assume that an assembly or something like this, that there needs to be something that's created out of traveller mentality.
You see, what I say happen a lot in the moment with the settled community is that it's a real number. We have our fighting or two, like, when that's not just settled, but it's very, very you're either in or out, and there's constant lines being drawn. We do that out of honour. We don't do it over the colour of your tea or whatever it might be, or simplistic things. So you got left, right, you got different groups in the left, you got different people, and they're all fracturing into smaller groups, but claiming to be in one bigger group. Now, the problem I have with that is that if you get any group of like-minded people, for one, they are like-minded. In other words, they were like-minded with you in the beginning. They went to the same kind of schools, same kind of philosophies, same kind of outlook on lives. So now they create a political party. So you got one political party with like-minded people, you got another political party with like-minded people, and you got Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil who are like-minded people. So it doesn't matter if you set them into 1, 2, or 4 groups. If they're all operating on the same system, in the same way the NGOs are operating the same system, the system itself is producing particular outcomes that are not good for anyone, let alone travellers. So that's all we have to fix.
Oh, this shouldn't be a problem.
Not at all, my friend. We've got a couple of questions. I'll read it. Wild tattoos, is it? Elite school teaching the upper class competency and confidence, while everyone else, the masses, are taught dimly, self-loathing, incompetence, etc. Yeah. The Truman Show could be another example of false reality.
Oh,
Trish,
yeah,
well done, Trish.
That's a good one.
Trish said they are quangos.
Yeah, I was going to say the Truman Show is a good example as well. Yeah.
Trish, Dylan, can you only solve it by being autonomous and independent of the state?
I don't know the answer. A bit like Bernard saying, I wouldn't know the answer to all of this, but I would say that we were talking about that earlier about the EU and countries has countries.
Well, I think Trish probably knows my view, so I think she's probably asking for yours.
Yeah, I don't think autonomous entirely, but I think from what we're saying, the logic would be that you would have to have that there would have to be some form of that without a kind of democratic representative thing created by travellers as a shelter, if you know what I mean, as a that interacts with the state, and the state allowing some room, the state being conscious of its history, it has to allow room somehow for these indigenous ways of life on the island to exist. To be honest with you, and that's going to have a big effect not just on travellers but on things like even the language and other aspects of Irish Gaelic life and the law and other things like this that have been that are constantly under that constant pressure that you were describing earlier. I mean, I think people who speak Irish language feel that too in a way, in a different. You know what I mean? It's not as in your face.
Well, that came from a long history of making people. It was actually using the Irish language was against the law.
Yes.
So even if you can't use it, you were looked down at and you were made to feel bad.
Yeah, and
I'm saying through generations.
I would be suggesting that without that space, the state needs to disengage from that constant contact, that constant grinding contact either with travellers or with anyone living that kind of way of life, and the Irish language and other things. And I think, as the best of me and Bernard are best surely that I would agree with is that some kind of an assembly is probably the best way to go. I think that other people, I don't see any reason why the state can't accommodate. I would think that regional democracy and regional governments are very poorly represented in Ireland anyway, no matter where you're from. That it's highly centralised in Dublin, one of the most centralised states in Western Europe. I don't think that's doing anyone any favours, even Dublin. And I believe that as part of the rollout of more democracy for everybody, that I think an assembly for travellers as well would be necessary, because then it would mean that NGOs and other societies, things that are engaging with, that want to engage with travellers or want to work with them or whatever, or are would have to answer to a traveller assembly as well.
Yeah.
Or be answerable to that, if you know what I mean. And it would provide some shelter for that culture to flourish to some extent. I don't see how it's going to happen otherwise.
No, absolutely.
Because what we're talking about means that the machine replicates the machine all the time.
Yeah.
And if you just keep doing it unconsciously, you're just going to have the same outcome. I suppose we're trying to get to the nitty-gritty.
Remember the 5-year accommodation plans?
Yeah, but we're trying to get to the nitty-gritty of why after 63. It's not that he even planned it all. They sort of did, but not really. Why after 63 would things keep getting worse when they're trying to get them better? Let's say after the 80s or 90s, where I think there's lots of genuine attempts to make things better, but they still get worse. And so this is the key thing that we're talking about, is that we're trying to say, well, you have to go a lot deeper to understand why things would keep getting worse, even when you think you're trying to make them better.
Yeah.
Because there's a deeper thing going on. And this is why it's the Matrix, isn't it? Because what's really going on is something that was set in motion 450 years ago.
So we can always talk about things about physical change there and then, but physical change can't happen just like that. It doesn't matter when you come up with physical change. So let's say we create a traveller assembly, and we work with all our groups, which is all a wonderful idea and something we've been talking about 20 years ago, myself and Patrick, never in a couple more. The problem you might have is that we need something in place that helps us to create a platform where we allow mentalities to be changed and influenced. In other words, we can create all the physical change by put up more NGOs, put up more organizations. But if the mentality hasn't changed, well, then the system is just going to keep doing over and over and over, despite the best intentions attended to it. And I think also with traveller organizations, and again, it's not to demonize them, they've done a lot of good work, is that it's not, even about the traveller assembly, it's not necessarily creating a fully autonomous group. Nobody can survive on a full autonomous group in a society. That wouldn't make sense. It would always have to be a semi-autonomous. In other words, we're connected to the system, we're connected to state, but we're allowed to create our own political aspirations and our own ideas and our own arts. With Travision, hopefully sometime, and if we ever get there, will be a whole ton of that, will be the arts. It's founded on the arts, the vision of the arts more than anything else. That's why we keep talking about movies and all this stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of precedent for that in indigenous things, other communities that have been rolled over by colonial machines.
See, about Patrick Nevin there a while back. He was in New York there actually a couple of days ago, and he was talking, and he mentioned about the reparations.
Yeah.
Now, we won't go into this. It's about reparations. But even in conversations we were having about 20 years ago, me and Patrick, and at that time, that seemed like the right place to start. But later on in life, when I was in the Matrix, things had changed, and now I could see a multiplex of different kinds of systems, and they're all operating, how they all fit into one. Now, people might call that society, and it's called work, but the outcomes, all overall, not just Ireland, not just in Europe, right across the world, the outcomes based on the same type program that once was programmed here first in Ireland, went to the United States, went to Australia, went to all the different countries. This English-speaking mentality. Nothing wrong with English people. It's perfect for the English people. They are of that program. They are the coders of that program. It works well for them. But it does work havoc in other parts of the world. We've seen that. So if you are the indigenous people of America and you're on the outside and you're seeing the white people and their mentality, and if you're an Aborigine, you see the same thing, or the Europeans, it's not necessarily European mentality. It's a very colonial one for starters. But we too can see what you see in many ways, because we too had very similar out experiences from the same system. So we had travel-only buses. We were segregated. We were forced assimilation. We had children taken put into boarding schools. This happened in America with the natives. It happened in Australia. And it happened in other parts of the world. So again, it's not about the settled, the traveller, or anything like that. It's human beings thinking differently. You're just more programmed and stuff like that.
Yeah. Something went wrong with my programming.
All right. Well, I think we're seeing someone there. Something here. Yeah. This is X. Yes, we get more foreign culture, history stories than our own from the media. The most harmful thing to our establishment is hearing about our own history. I think that's what they think, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I think Jeremy Corbyn has mentioned this a while back about England should apologise or some way make some kind of amends for its atrocities around the world.
May I? Yeah.
May you suggest
no,
one?
You're right. I was going to say, may I suggest that actually that's funny because here we're going to get into it's going to get really interesting and it's matrixy because they would. That's correct. But we can also predict they would think that, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And we can also predict, unfortunately, there are other programs that are not well written regardless, slightly damaged,
so we
would use that to further worse gains, worse outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to be a little bit careful how it's used, but we also need to when you stand back a little bit, you'd also realise that the system benefits certain people. That's fine. That it's whatever. It's not really conscious there either. And yeah, there is a fear of that past coming out, but that in itself is a symptom of the same thing we're talking about.
Yeah,
because it's colonial, you know what I mean, and because of that fear that the colonial system had of the natives is very typical, and that's continuing unconsciously as well.
Absolutely.
Do you remember that thing we were I'd noted recently?
Just based on the reparations, because it just gets a point that I made a minute ago and just gets no, it's perfectly fine. Because I just thought the point afterwards. Right. I was trying to finish it there and then. That's why I
thought I was going to say something
dangerous. No, you're perfectly fine.
Am I going to say something dangerous?
The thing about the reparations is that if that's the fear the state has, that the trappers are going to sue the state for the traumatization of a nation of people, reduced down to 50,000 people. It sounds a bit kind of frightening. But I can't speak on behalf of all trappers. I sense this isn't about money. This isn't about suing the state for money. This is about creating a platform of our own where we can breed and be ourselves. I don't mean breed like rabbits, but we can do that too. But more so, do we create our culture and our identity and we birth it and give it life and build it and share it, because it's the exact same history as what once was the Irish settled people. Most anyway. That was just about the reparations. I wanted to make it clear that it isn't about money.
Oh, I see.
Reparations can come in form.
It's land, isn't it?
Well, it has to be about land. Well, think about it. If this mentality can come up with a law and say to a traveller, you can be put in jail if you were anywhere on this land in a 5-year ratio, or whatever it might be. So basically, but where we are in Ireland, it's illegal. So yeah, definitely about land, I can tell you.
Well, we were kind of laughing, but it's true that, like I was saying a second ago, though, it's true. You see that the fear of that thing and what we're talking about of the history coming out and all the rest of it, that's true. But we kind of need that, and it's like I was saying a minute ago, that in itself is a symptom of the colonial thing, and it would be typical, and it's what we talked about. When say, like I'm saying Dublin, but I don't mean people in Dublin. I just mean the machine again.
Yeah.
When it spent 1,000 years almost of its history as a minority in a country that was a Gaelic country, if you know what I mean, and it was often taxed. Irish kings used to tax Dublin in the Middle Ages, and then by the 1500s, it was only a small area around the Pale that was actually that mentality that you're talking about. What we would now,
but it's just beyond that. I was not beyond that. When we say it was a small mentality, it was a minority. It was also part of an imperial system. It had it's a bit like South Africa. It might be a minority of white people.
Later. That's later after the conquest.
Yeah, but just
I'm talking about before it.
Okay, so beg your pardon.
It's literally a minority. They're behind the Pale wall, if you know what I mean. And so for them, beyond the Pale frontier, is a wild land, but it's a huge, big area compared to what they're in.
Say just before, who was there before the English took it over? Who were these people?
A handful of Vikings. No, the English were in it as well. I'm saying through the Middle Ages until 1520s, the Pale is only the size of Dublin County.
I gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you imagine outside that, you've got this big, most of the country is under Gaelic system, if you know what I mean, right up until relatively recent times. If you know
99% of the island were, we'll say the used term, were Irish travellers, because
running that program. Yeah.
And now we're reduced down to a fraction of. If you
so naturally they themselves. Now I'm concentrating on the other side of it, and I'm saying that what fears would you have in your head if you had grown up in the Pale? If the Pales people would have for 1,000 years, if you know what I mean. And I mean particularly the rich ones. I don't mean the ordinary people now. You know what I mean, who are going about their business like they always were. But we're all great people as well. But the point would be that, like, the elites that this person was talking about.
But if you take, for example, right,
that fear of what was beyond the pale, that's the thing that we're talking about. That's still identifiable in Irish politics, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but also
in Irish
fear aspect was used for two purposes. It was used to make gains and control, right? Well, obviously it was. But if you take Dublin later stage and it had the whole imperial backing of it.
Oh, yeah.
That completely different. So we were reduced down to a very fractional minority. But the reason I want to say that was we don't feel or sense that foreigners came to our land and met us a minority. It didn't. This was a colonial globalist situation that happened. It was a mentality thing. It was a driven psychological program. So I guess what I'm saying to you more times than often is that we are the suppressed. We're the ones that get the worst treatment on the island. We get treated worse than animals. And that's just a given. Every statistic, every fact has proof of that. But we're telling you in the nicest possible way that we're not your enemies. We don't overthrow the system. We don't want to make people suffer or hurt. But we defeat the purpose of doing what we're doing in the first place. Also, we're looking out for right-wing fascism and stuff like that misinterpreted a lot of history. And that's no disrespect to you. I get where some of we are coming from in terms of anger and pain and the anti-corruption type thing in the system and all of that. Now, there are two extremities when I say right-wing fascism. There are the people who are just the people. And then there's a very philosophical, psychological element to it that comes with a lot of control of money. But that's bigger field. What I'm saying is don't try to understand history from 1922. Don't try to understand it from the 1700s or 1800s. To go back to when we were first started, the colonization. That's when our history, English-Irish history, started. A couple of questions here for you, John. The West and rural areas get raw deal. That's very true. The 1960s.
Yeah, that's another.
Yeah,
sorry.
I was the same person because I know this one's important to this person, and I forget this one. I don't. So the 1960s report was not to make things better. It was deliberately the attempt to eradicate us. That's. I'll tell you,
okay, well, I might have suggested it was. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well,
I didn't. I was trying to be. I'm trying to be. How would you put it? Neutral and nice in the sense of like, let's imagine everyone had the best of intentions.
No, but I'm going to be honest with you.
Well, I would agree.
But I said throughout the years and elements that I said the same thing. What you're about to say is that some people there did not have the bad intentions. It's a bit like when I give out about NGOs doing things that I know are predictably horrible, and I've been doing so for the last 20 years. I don't think they're deliberately trying to kill our culture or elaborate or eradicate it. I think that's what they believed. They believed that this was the problem, that the way they saw it, in their mentality, their programming told them this was the best outcomes for people they did not understand.
Well, let's imagine even a scenario where people genuinely, especially at that time, genuinely believe, because in their version of what we call the Matrix, in their version of the program, they believe that everything, it's a function of the trauma itself, if you know what I mean, that Irish people had turned away after the famine from their own culture anyway. And for a lot of them that did that, they still didn't want to be reminded of it. It was a symbol of poverty, backwardness, and their defeat. You know what I mean? And anything that reminded them of the old way of life or the old, you know what I mean, and reminded them that they once lived like that, were things that they were much more bothered even than the English were. The English just took it as for granted. That's how Irish people are, right?
Yeah.
But for those Irish who had turned away from it, and you know what I mean, and become more and more, more settled and more English than the English type thing or whatever.
But there's two things that happens.
For them, it's unconscious things we're talking about here. And yes, I agree that okay, so the end result of it is a disaster and is almost fascist in its tendency of like its ideas of eliminating a culture. But I think that quite often you'll find that people, and it's not an excuse for it. It's not an excuse, but you'll often find that people's intent. People think, oh, the best thing to do here is to get these people. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll give you that one idea where
it's a terrible thing.
Where there might be, because it wasn't just they were all nicey, and believe it or not, there was the first time 5-year accommodation plan was mentioned.
Yeah, but I hinted on purpose. I just say this. I did say that history was left out on purpose.
Yeah,
and that's very obvious in that.
Well, there was other elements were shocking. It was deliberately take away these children from this inherent way of life and save the settled people. It was also talking about how could the state identify travellers. In other words, they were going to label us and put gold stars on us. This is 15 years after what happened in Germany. Yes. So I'll give you an idea in terms of, I don't think they were thinking anything.
I think people would be quite shocked when when this becomes more, when there's documentaries made or when other things like this, and I think it'll be seen in the light of the same sort of thing, if you know what I mean, in the future,
horrifying
in the future,
Yeah,
in the short, not so distant future. I would agree with that in general. I think it's still important.
See, the other thing about the mentalities, right? Two flows of mentalities, right? No matter where you are, whether it be male, female, whether it be the one community or another, is that when you have one community, a bit like Ireland, and this includes a lot of Irish settled people, who are on a particular mentality and have gone through centuries of trauma. In other words, all of these things that have ever happened has never stopped. Now, it has basically stopped for settled people the last 100 years. But again, look at the psychological issues within Ireland alone comparing to the rest of Europe. There's something not quite right within, deep in the settled community themselves. But if you take that trauma, and that trauma is inflicted onto your parents and your grandparents, or whatever it might be, the whole long list, and it always has been, through the famine, they hand that trauma to you. The other part of this, right, the other part of this mentality, this matrix, this mentality, over this side, is they still don't see that.
No.
So they're still operating in a system that they think is best for the market, it's best overall, it'll have all, but despite every century, every decade, repeating the same systems. I don't think we have much time left on the planet at this rate.
So there's so I would say that, I suppose what I was trying to say is there's across the board in Irish society, there'd be, without addressing the history, there's also unconscious things going on in the settled community. And some of the things that we see, like hatred or against things like the Irish language, against travellers, against any aspects of things that are all very interestingly surviving aspects of Irish native culture, are things that are reminding them probably, and a psychologist would have a field day with this stuff, but the trauma are reminding them of where they came from themselves, if you know what I mean, to some extent. And we could, I can't, I'm not going to prove that right now, but we could say that some of the elements of some of the things happening in the reports over the years, and some of the behaviour of the state is very much wrapped up in that. They're not even fully conscious of why they're doing it. And I get it. There is some privileged elites that it suits. There is some things like that it's suited to maintain the status quo. It's people are rarely as clever or as, you know what I mean, when it comes to these things, rarely sit there and evilly work out the master plan. But it is true that we need, it's true that we can't, that the end result is still disastrous.
But saying that, with that, I still believe there's a particular coding that goes on, because scientists will tell you the human DNA and body is coded anyway. They think everything's coded, right?
Absolutely.
So with the mentality, so if I was in control of this mentality and I was 500 people or 1,000 people, I couldn't educate them all the same way to the same thing. So I need to educate them to do different things. And plus that, you create divisions and divides, because all of this is connected and it goes back into the same system. It's kind of a bit of a minefield.
The question is, can it be counter-hacked? Can the hack be hacked?
Well, you can. I think we can rewrite coding. I honestly, truly do believe that. Now, like I said to you, my personal experience through all of this has been one of 20 years of fighting with NGOs. And when I say fighting with them, when I first came out of this, is why I cursed the Matrix in one way, after watching that movie. Because not long after that, when I could pick up on the patterns, which I always grew up with, you could see, like I said, the distinctions. But when I started picking up the patterns on NGOs and how they were identical, and how programs were identical, and how there was no follow-up for the programs, you just said to yourself, folks, they're not being smart here, but if anything, you're adding to our oppression. So I call them oppressors in a nice way, but I wasn't used to words. So from there, things didn't go well with me in the NGOs. And for that purpose, I was never near the system to challenge it. That's not just me. That's a bunch of travellers who were qualified, more qualified than I'll ever be, in terms of they've got degrees, PhDs, and stuff like that. I should also say degrees and PhDs, not PhDs and degrees, and go backwards. Anyway.
Okay.
So basically, what time have we got? We got an hour and 8 minutes. We're going to leave. We got a couple more questions. We'll call it a
if anyone's written anything, Let's see now. Maybe we're still in the Matrix. Which pill would I take? Yeah, that's what we were joking about.
Well, I was going to bring a box of Smarties, and then I was going to give Dylan one, but then Dylan was telling me he was colourblind.
Yeah, I could take either one, and I probably wouldn't know which
one. Or anything with no difference.
Yeah, probably wouldn't know.
Trisha's saying diplomatic, which I think she's referring to you.
Yeah.
I think the important thing about this
I
not applying hate. You're not applying kind of a vengeance or accusory, because shit happened everywhere throughout history. You just have to get over it and learn from it.
I'm traumatized just from reading it.
Yeah.
Trust me. But no, I mean, talking about pills there, I went through the down the rabbit hole and out the other side kind of thing even in archaeology, because I mean, I suppose I would have been looking at I'm looking at the code in the Matrix myself, if you know what I mean, in a different way, looking at the things that we were studying, if you know what I mean, and then realizing, hang on, that doesn't quite make sense.
The other thing with the Matrix is interesting because sometimes people pop out of the Matrix. In other words, for whatever reason, whether they got rejected or something happened to them, and then they see it like, oh, evil place, and you can see all this stuff. Then they get accepted back into it, and they're shoom, and they're sound. They're like that guy eating the steak. Yeah. They're more than happy to get back into it.
So if we crack it now and then, they give us jobs for loads of money. They give us loads of money and all the rest of it. Put us in charge of our own NGO. What are you going to do? Are we going to? Tough
one, yeah. Basically, I think I take the money and send it back.
Don't worry, it's not going to happen.
Don't be too surprised either. Because this is about mental health. It is about saving lives. But people understand where I'm coming from at the moment, but I think they do. I think again we're talking about the Matrix. It's all metaphors, all different.
I think that with some increase, if we're on the right track, understanding can, I think, can make a big difference to mental health, and that's what we would hope. And by opening up, making more sense out of what for many people seems not to make sense, if you know what I mean.
Well, saying that, we also, the Twos got invited to give a talk in Limerick University. I think it's among other people. It's around project creativity and mentalities and stuff like that. Should have read it. If you're watching, I know it's very important. I believe that. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I do also say this, and I keep saying it about Transvision, is if we do get the opportunity, we do get the investment, we'll show you a world through the lens of the uncolonized, the traveler, the rogue archaeologists, the Jedis. The Jedi, we did mention the Jedis, briefly on the Jedis, right? The Jedis have this particular power. They can sense the Force. I'm not bullshitting you down and tell you this, but a lot of travelers, I do genuinely believe, have a natural, intelligent intuition. And we geared that, because we have that because we didn't have that other education, what they call intelligence, which are completely wrong. It's a program. But they have that. And now, again, other people in that have that also. I'm not saying they don't, but I think travelers genuinely have it a lot stronger. Now, again, you hear about close family members and you can sense something is wrong. It's a bit like that. So,
okay.
And you have a bit of that. So we're Jedis.
Well, we're going to do, we can do a program sometime on
the Star Wars.
The Jedi and their connection to Irish history. Yeah.
Janet Crystal, that's a true statement. Which one, Janet? Because we've covered quite a lot of them.
It's probably to do with the Jedi. Is it to do with the first Jedi temple? Is in? I was telling you that.
That's right. So in that movie, right? Could be wrong. They were talking about Irish history in a way, because they mentioned about the 800-year war, which is a bit of a coincidence, and then they shot some of the places here, didn't they?
That's right. Yeah, the first Jedi temple is on the Skelligs. So we're talking. Well, that's a whole other subject.
We're going to the nerd there.
Yes, we do a show.
May the Force be with you.
Yes.
What we got there was come to the dark side. We have cookies. I'm in. Folks, we're going to leave it at that. I'm going to. It's your show. You.
No, you can.
No, go on.
Keep going.
Keep going. Yeah, I think that's it for. Mind you, we got 8 viewers. That's a record.
Yes.
Woo! Someday this might be important. Anytime in between that we find the tubers are in an asylum, please send us emails and look after us. Send us nice notes.
Kit Kats.
I find very interesting that the bits in the Matrix where the agents can immediately morph into another person, take control of them. All right. This is what I think where they're coming with that point is that the state, the system, can keep replicating the same thing over and over. So like chopping the head off a snake, it'll recreate another one. I think that's what you're saying, is it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, morph into a person and take control of them. Yeah, well, yeah. I'm not sure what they mean, but they could mean a lot of different things, and a lot of them would make sense as well, though.
A lot of them, like you could say,
it's a bit like we said about it replicating. It's a bit like if you keep on every time you try to solve a problem, but if you're using the same, if you're make like an NGO is like a little version of the machine of the bigger system that was created under colonial system to, with all the mentalities.
That has an historical roots too,
Yeah, exactly. So there's all those mentalities, brings all that baggage with it that we're not conscious of, but it's there.
Yeah.
And so you can predict that every time you create something the same, it's going to have the same effect. It's like, you know what I mean?
There is another thing
You've
about
got
it.
to change it.
I think I'm taken from the agents, how they can quickly become an agent like that. Is one, they have the greatest source of power for education, uploading people's softwares.
We figured out someone was an agent the other day, didn't we?
Did we?
Yeah.
Was it? Tell me your names.
No.
Who was it?
The great leader of you said he was a Smith fellow, was it? Or, you know what I mean?
Oh, Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
Well, who's the agent?
The Taoiseach? No.
I didn't say that. Don't mind him. Oh, man.
Right, okay.
Be Leo the leader if you see this and come and talk to us. But I guess I think Leo's a bit of a Matrix fan too.
He would be, yeah.
Yeah, he has I think around the sunglasses and he's trying to do impose type things. And
yeah, exactly.
but he is in the Matrix. He is part of the
No,
Matrix.
I'm just trying to
but he's not a bad person. It's just that he thinks
yes.
the way the Matrix wants him to think.
Sorry, I tried to land you in it there.
Well, let me in and all you want to. Hopefully we get an opportunity to talk to him sometime and educate him.
Okay,
that's it. Folks, thank you very much. There is an old lady in the kitchen. This is good. There's an old lady in the kitchen that sees Neo running past and she gets controlled by the agent and throws a knife at him. It also happens to a helicopter pilot. But I think that's a form of almost like saying being brainwashed, taking control of simultaneously at any given time. In other words, the state, the government, or the system can come out and grab just about any person and take control of them, one way or the other. Drop the mic.
Yeah.
Have a good evening. You want to finish and say Merry Christmas and all that stuff? Also, happy birthday to Noam Chomsky, who was 91 yesterday. We'll talk to her in a week.
Okay, that'll do. That's...
Have a good one, folks.
Yeah.
May the force be with you.
Yeah. May the force be with you.
We were caught in the Matrix for a couple of hours earlier on.
We were.
Take care.
We were.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
It's the big red button, isn't it?
That's the one there, yeah. And again.